Hi, everybody. If you don't know who Whitney Webb is, or if you don't read her stuff, then you're missing probably the best investigative reporter in America today. And I really want to talk to you about the passports and also about Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein. I know you're doing a book about that right now, about their odd, strange bedfellows. But I will say this, that I don't know how you do it, Whitney, how you do your research, but you are more dialed in than anybody that I know and understand kind of the gravity of what's happening and who all the characters are and the role not only of the pharmaceutical industry, but the banks, the financial industry, the intelligence agencies, and others in, I guess, what people would now call the Great Reset. Imposition, this use, this leveraging that we're seeing of the pandemic to impose these totalitarian controls and these huge cultural and value shifts and structural shifts in American democracy. Whitney writes for her own website, which is called Unlimited Hangout, and she also writes often for The Defender. Thank you for doing that, and also for The Last American Vagabond. But her stories are the kind of stories that I just wait, to come out, and I'm very excited when I see anything new that you've written. Let's talk about Bill Gates and his friend Jeffrey Epstein. And wait, was that really a friendship? What was going on there?
Well, it's hard to just describe exactly the nature of the relationship in that sense, because a lot of the way the people around Epstein were, it's hard to really call them friends, because a lot of the way that network operates is through blackmail, even on people that are technically on their side. So it's a very dog eat dog world, I guess you could say. So friends may sort of be a loose term in the way that, regular people understand it. When you're talking about this type of, ruling elite, they have a very different mentality and a very different approach to friendship maybe than, than the average person would. But what's particularly notable about the Bill Gates-Jeffrey Epstein relationship is that even now that it's being talked about in mainstream circles in connection with the Gates' divorce, the mainstream media continues to assert that they did not meet until 2011. There is a mountain of evidence, in my opinion, that suggests that this is categorically false and that they actually knew each other back in the 1990s. I first stumbled upon this in 2019 when I was doing an investigative series on the Epstein scandal. There was a scrubbed article from January 22nd, 2001 that had originally been published in the Evening Standard, a well-respected UK newspaper, talking about Prince Andrew and his relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. And the part on Jeffrey Epstein and the reason it was scrubbed, it appears to have been scrubbed during the period of his first arrest between 2006 and 2007, is because it mentions the fact that Jeffrey Epstein, at some point before the publication of that article, had openly claimed to have been working in collaboration with the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. So, of course, the revelations that later came to light about Epstein, obviously the powers that be, the national security state, didn't want to have any obvious ties hanging around there. So that article ended up disappearing. But what was also notable about that article and what stuck out to me is that, since this was published in 2001, there's a line in there talking about Epstein, saying that Epstein was a billionaire hedge fund manager, which was sort of or property developer, which was sort of the theme at the time in articles about Epstein. But it says that Epstein made his millions through his business links with three individuals: Leslie Wexner, Donald Trump, and Bill Gates being the third, which is pretty significant when you consider the closeness of someone like Donald Trump and Leslie Wexner to Jeffrey Epstein. To have Bill Gates in a list of those alongside those two individuals suggests the ties were rather close. At least one Epstein victim that I've spoken to personally, who was in the, sort of embroiled in Epstein's network from 1995 to 1996, said that she heard Epstein and Maxwell talk about Bill Gates, like they knew him really well. And of course, we know that Nathan Myhrvold, who was chief technology officer of Microsoft throughout the 1990s, one of Bill Gates' closest confidants who co-wrote his book, The Road Ahead, in the late 90s, very, very much involved in Microsoft's business and Bill Gates' life as well, was very close to Jeffrey Epstein during the 1990s. He traveled with him actually to Russia as part of a Microsoft Russia conference. There's photographs of Epstein being part of that trip, along with a journalist, sort of a digital media journalist named Esther Dyson. Esther Dyson, Bill Gates, Nathan Myhrvold, and a lot of the Silicon Valley elite are part of something called the Edge Foundation, which is basically how Epstein was able to connect so intimately with a lot of the individuals that would later become the Silicon Valley elite. This includes people like Jeff Bezos, Kim Ball, and Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Nathan Myhrvold, and some other names as well. Also, and responsible for how he ended up having dinners with people like Google co-founder Sergey Brin. All of these people were connected to the Edge Foundation, which was founded by this literary agent who also has ties to the national security state named John Brockman. From about 2001 to 2017, Epstein was pretty much the main donor to the Edge Foundation, and it was basically an influence operation for him. It's interesting to see that a lot of these tech names that surround Epstein also have Edge in common. But beyond that, Nathan Myhrvold was also reported to, when he created Intellectual Ventures after leaving Microsoft in 2000, he would receive quote unquote young women and quote unquote Russian models from Jeffrey Epstein at the offices of this firm, which is quite unsettling when you consider the implications of that and what, Russian models and all of this stuff would later come to mean when more information about the case came out. So I think there is a really deliberate cover up of, these Gates-Epstein ties. We also know for a fact that Melanie Walker, who was actually currently co-chair of the World Economic Forum's Futures Council, that's sort of gaming out a lot of this technocratic takeover, she was one of the advisors to the Gates Foundation, I believe, beginning in 2005. And she got that job because prior to that, she was the science advisor for Jeffrey Epstein. Basically, Melanie Walker, when she graduated from college, was recruited by Jeffrey Epstein, offered a modeling job at Victoria's Secret. And then as soon as she graduated from medical school, I believe in 1998, she became his personal science advisor, guiding his science investments at a time that he began to move into this Edge Foundation network. Once she applied to basically fulfill the same position at the Gates Foundation, her resume was having been Jeffrey Epstein's science advisor. So for Bill Gates and Melinda to hire her and not know who Jeffrey Epstein was at the time is honestly kind of ludicrous. Why would you hire someone whose resume is being a science advisor for this person, but you have no idea, you don't know who that person is? Obviously, they would have had to, investigate if they didn't already know. But the facts that I've mentioned earlier are also significant. And aside from Epstein, before I forget, in the 1990s, it's definitely documented that Bill Gates had a cozy business relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell's sister, Isabel Maxwell, who was intimately involved in intelligence operations as well, specifically involving tech ventures. And that includes not just with Bill Gates, but also with Paul Allen. But in the case of Bill Gates, Isabel's statements about Bill Gates in the year 2000 in an article in The Guardian are very odd. Isabel Maxwell speaks with a British accent, but in speaking about Bill Gates to this Guardian journalist, she adopts a fake Southern Belle accent. This is how The Guardian describes it, and starts purring as she talks about how Bill Gates was looking to keep looking to pay low taxes and had basically offered money to the company she was leading at the time, ComTouch, which was basically deeply tied to Israeli intelligence networks that, her father, Robert Maxwell, had been intimately involved in. And it appears that the way for that, money transfer to ComTouch from Bill Gates, the way for that to be tax-free, it wasn't through Microsoft. It was very likely through one of the investment vehicles associated with the Gates Foundation that was set up around that same time. So, to be tied to the Maxwells, Nathan Myhrvold, and all of this stuff, there's a lot of indicators that the relationship predates 2011. I'm just investigating with open source material. Obviously, mainstream media has a lot more resources than I do, and they have showed no interest in looking into ties that predate 2011. So I think that's very telling. Even with these new revelations that are coming out about the Bill Gates, Jeffrey Epstein relationship, they do not want to look at the period before that. And I think they really should. And so hopefully this piece I have coming out in the next week or so will shed light on that. But it's definitely, and before I forget too, Melanie Walker, the science advisor that went between Epstein and that went from Epstein to Gates, is also the person that introduced Bill Gates to Boris Nikolic, who later was also his science advisor a few years later, I believe, and who was also named as Jeffrey Epstein's the backup executor to his will after his death was announced in the fall of 2019. So there's definitely indications that there were a lot of, the cozy ties that have since been described by mainstream media from 2011 on definitely, existed well before then. And so the question is, why is mainstream media so reluctant to look into the actual origins of that relationship? I think there is cause for concern there for sure.